Have you ever been about to leave for work, only to find your car broken down? And when you ask to borrow the brand new Tesla your parents just bought for your younger brother, your mother coldly tells you, "Not everyone gets to drive this car." It started with a dead battery. I had woken up early for work like I always did, grabbed my bag, and stepped outside, only to find my car refusing to start. Just great. I was already running late. With no time to call for a repair, I did the logical thing. I walked back inside and asked to borrow my brother Damian's car for the day. It wasn't a big deal. He barely even used it. But before I could even finish my sentence, my mother looked me dead in the eyes and said, "Not everyone gets to drive that car." That car. A Tesla my parents had bought for Damian on his 18th birthday. A car that was insured under their names, fueled by their money, and barely driven. I stood there stunned. "I just needed to get to work," I managed to say. "You're independent, aren't you?" she scoffed. "Figure it out." And that's when it hit me. I wasn't really part of this family. I was just there. This is a true story from r/true off my chest. A place where people share their deepest, most painful truths. And this is my truth. If you enjoy real-life stories like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more from Reddit True Vault. I don't know why I'm even writing this. Maybe because I need to let it out. Maybe because, for the first time in my life, I finally understand where I stand in my own family. I used to think parents were supposed to love their kids unconditionally, that even if they had favorites, they still cared about the others. That deep down, somewhere beneath the unfairness, the neglect, the constant comparisons, there was still love. I was wrong. They never hated me outright. That would have been easier, honestly. At least hatred is something real, something you can fight against. But what they did was worse. They ignored me. Not in the too busy to play with you kind of way, but in the you are not important enough to acknowledge kind of way. I was a shadow in my own home. I'm not going to sit here and pretend my childhood was some kind of horror story. It wasn't. I had food, a roof over my head, clothes on my back. But love, attention, support? Those things were for Damian, my younger brother, the golden child. I was 4 when Damian was born, and at first, I was excited. I remember my parents telling me, "Yeah, you're going to be a big brother now. You have to take care of him." And I took that seriously. I wanted to be the best big brother ever. I wanted to make them proud. But somewhere along the way, I stopped existing. At first, it was little things. Mom and Dad missing my school events, but showing up to all of Damian's. Praising him for things I had done years before with barely a glance. Letting him get away with things I would have been grounded for. But the moment I truly understood was when I was 7. It was Christmas morning. I remember running down the stairs, my heart racing with excitement. I had been dropping hints for months about this one Lego set I wanted. My parents nodded, smiled, said, "We'll see." And then I saw the presents. Damian had a mountain. Toys, games, clothes, everything. I had 3. A sweater that was too small, socks, and a book about learning responsibility. I remember just sitting there, staring, wondering what I had done wrong. And then Damian, 3 years old, picked up one of his new toy cars, looked at me, and with all the innocence of a child, said, "Why didn't Santa like you?" I swallowed hard, forcing a smile. Maybe I wasn't good enough this year. That was the first time I ever felt truly invisible. But it wouldn't be the last. I wish I could say things got better, but they didn't. By the time I was 11, it was clear. Damian was the star. I was the afterthought. He was the one they cheered for at soccer games. I was the one they forgot to pick up from school. He got tutors when his grades slipped. I got scolded for not trying harder. He got weekend trips with Dad. I got left behind because I probably wouldn't enjoy it anyway. By 13, I stopped trying. Stopped waiting for them to notice me. Stopped asking for things. Stopped expecting anything. And honestly, that made things easier. Because if you don't expect love, you can't be hurt when it never comes. The year Damian turned 16 was the same year I did. The difference? When Damian turned 16, he got an all-expenses-paid trip to Europe for the summer. I still remember the way my parents beamed at him, talking about how he deserved to see the world. Me? I got a handshake and a reminder that real men work for what they want. I had been working since I was 15, odd jobs, part-time shifts, anything to save up for a car. And when I finally had enough to buy a beat-up Honda that barely ran, you know what my mom said. "See? Hard work pays off." Like I should be grateful that I had to bust my ass for something they handed to Damian without a second thought. I didn't say anything. Just nodded. Smiled. Because by then, I had learned something important. They weren't going to change. College came, and the pattern continued. Damian's tuition? Covered. His apartment? Paid for. His expenses? Handled. Me? You're independent, Callum. You'll figure it out. So I did. I worked 2 jobs while studying full-time. I took night shifts, skipped meals, lived off instant ramen. And somehow, I made it work. I graduated with honors, got a decent job, built a stable life. And then, something funny happened. Suddenly, my parents remembered I existed. Not because they were proud, not because they cared, but because I had something they wanted. Money. It started small. Callum, can you help cover the electric bill this month? Things are tight. Then it was, Callum, your father and I sacrificed so much for you. The least you can do is give back a little. And then, before I even realized what was happening, I was paying their mortgage, their credit cards, their vacations. And every time I hesitated, they'd remind me how lucky I was. Not everyone gets to be successful like you, Callum. Damian is still figuring things out. You wouldn't abandon your family, would you? You're the responsible one. We know we can count on you. I fell for it. I let them bleed me dry, because deep down, that little kid who got socks for Christmas was still waiting for them to see him, to love him, to tell him he was enough. But that day never came, because to them, I wasn't their son. I was their wallet. And the day I finally realized that was the day Damian graduated at 22 years old, and my parents bought him a brand new Tesla to celebrate. I still remember watching them hand over the keys, smiling at him with pride, talking about how he deserved it. And you know what I got when I graduated at 22? Nothing. They didn't even show up to my ceremony. That was the moment I knew. They never saw me as family. I was just the backup plan, and I was done playing that role. You ever have a moment that changes everything? Not in some dramatic, movie-like way. No music swelling in the background. No slow-motion realization. Just a single, ordinary moment that snaps something inside you. So quietly, so seamlessly, that you don't even realize what's happened until later. For me, that moment was 6 months after my parents bought Damian a Tesla. A brand new, fully loaded Tesla to celebrate his college graduation. The same graduation they didn't even show up for when it was mine. At the time, I didn't react. Not outwardly. I told myself I didn't care. That it was just another reminder of where I stood in the family. But that morning, the morning my car refused to start, that was the day everything clicked. It was supposed to be a normal day. I had my alarm set for 6:30 a.m., like always. Got up, showered, grabbed a protein bar on the way out. Nothing unusual, until I slid into the driver's seat, turned the key, and nothing. I frowned. Tried again. Still nothing. Battery? Maybe. I had just replaced it a few months ago, but anything was possible. Either way, I had 20 minutes to get to work, and no time to figure it out. I did a quick mental rundown of my options. Public transport? It'd take too long. Rideshare? I had my rent and utilities due that week. Money was tight. That's when I glanced toward the driveway, toward Damian's Tesla. I wasn't stupid. I already knew the answer before I even asked. But for some reason, I still held on to the smallest shred of hope as I walked inside. Found my mom in the kitchen and said, "Hey, can I borrow Damian's car? Just for work." "My car won't start." She barely looked up from her coffee. "No." I blinked. "No." She finally met my eyes, her expression unreadable. "Not everyone gets to drive that car." It took me a second to process what I had just heard. She said it so casually, so effortlessly, like it was just a fact, like it was something I should have already known. I don't even know how long I stood there, because in that moment, it wasn't about the car. It wasn't about the inconvenience of taking the bus, or the fact that I was about to be late for work. It was about everything else. All the Christmases I was forgotten. All the school events they never came to. All the years I spent breaking my back to survive while Damian had everything handed to him. And now, I couldn't even borrow a car for a few hours? Because not everyone gets to drive that car. I swallowed the anger burning in my throat. I didn't argue, didn't beg, didn't ask why, because I already knew why. Instead, I just nodded, turned around, and walked out. She didn't stop me. Of course she didn't. I was nothing to stop. I made it to work that day, took the bus, arrived 10 minutes late, and got chewed out by my boss. But I barely heard him, because the entire ride, the entire morning, one thought kept looping through my head like a broken record. I was never going to be enough for them. Not because I wasn't successful, not because I wasn't responsible, not because I didn't work hard, but because they didn't want me to be enough. If I was enough, they wouldn't have anyone to look down on, wouldn't have a scapegoat, wouldn't have a financial safety net. I was never their son. I was just a backup plan. And suddenly, I didn't want to be that anymore. Something shifted in me that day. Maybe it had been shifting for years, and I just hadn't noticed. But sitting on that bus, staring out the window, watching people go about their lives, I realized something. I didn't hate my parents. I wasn't even angry anymore. I just didn't care. Didn't care about proving myself. Didn't care about earning their love. didn't care about fixing something that was never going to be fixed. That part of me, the part that still hoped for something different, it was gone. And that was the most freeing feeling in the world. You ever get a letter that changes your entire life? Not a birthday card, not a job offer, not some nostalgic note from an old friend. I mean a letter that shatters everything. A letter that makes you sit down, hands shaking, heart pounding, realizing that nothing will ever be the same again. I got that letter on a Tuesday, a normal day, a normal afternoon, until I opened that goddamn envelope. I was sorting through my mail, tossing the usual junk aside, when I saw it. A formal-looking envelope from my bank. That was weird. I had no loans, no credit card debt, nothing that should have required an official letter. I ripped it open, and then my entire world collapsed, because inside was a notice of overdue payments on a loan I never took out, a $25,000 loan taken out under my name. I felt my stomach drop. My mind raced through every possibility. Fraud, identity theft, some kind of mistake. But then I saw the co-signers listed on the account. My parents. I couldn't breathe. They had used my name to take out a loan, without asking, without telling me, without even considering what it would do to me. And they had let it default, because, of course, they assumed I would just take care of it, like I always did. I don't remember the drive to their house. 1 second, I was in my apartment, shaking with rage. The next, I was standing at their front door, fists clenched so tightly my nails dug into my palms. I didn't knock. I walked straight in. My mother was in the kitchen, stirring a cup of tea like she didn't have a single care in the world. She looked up, completely unfazed. "Callum," she said, "you should really text before you." I slammed the letter onto the counter. She blinked down at it. Then, with the most casual shrug, she said, "Oh, that." I was shaking. "Explain," I said, my voice deadly quiet. She sighed, setting her spoon down. "We needed the money. And, well, you weren't using your credit. So you stole my identity?" She rolled her eyes. "Callum, don't be dramatic." I felt my chest tighten. "Don't be dramatic. Like this was nothing. Like it was normal to steal from your own son." "Mom," I said, voice shaking, "you put me in debt. You ruined my credit. You have money," she interrupted smoothly. "You can pay it off." I just stared at her. She said it so easily, like it was the most obvious thing in the world, like she had done me a favor. My father walked in then. Rubbing his temples like this was all just so inconvenient for him. "What's with the yelling?" he muttered. My mother gestured toward me with mild annoyance. "Callum's upset about the loan." Dad barely reacted. "Oh." He grabbed a beer from the fridge. "Look, son, you make more than enough. Just take care of it." "I didn't take out the damn loan." He sighed. "Callum, we needed to help Damian." And there it was. Damian, the golden child. The reason I had been treated like an afterthought my entire life. I let out a hollow laugh. "Of course," I whispered. "Of course, this was for him." Mom gave me a look, the same one she always gave me when I wasn't cooperating with their expectations. "Callum," she said, voice sickly sweet, "Damian deserves a strong start in life. He has so much potential. And you're independent. You don't need help. You never have." I felt my entire body go numb, not because I was shocked, but because I wasn't. I had always known, deep down, I was never their priority. I exhaled slowly. "Okay." Mom frowned. "Okay." I nodded. "Okay. You win. You've made your choice." She smiled, probably thinking I had finally given in. But then I pulled my phone from my pocket, and right in front of them, I called my bank. Right in front of them, I reported the fraud. Right in front of them, I started the legal process to have my name removed from the debt. My mother's face went pale. "Callum," she said sharply, "you don't have to do that." I met her eyes, and for the first time in my life, I felt nothing. "I don't have to do a lot of things," I said quietly. Then I ended the call, and I ended them. I walked out that day and never looked back. Blocked their numbers, blocked their emails, blocked every single avenue they had to reach me. I was done, and you know what? It hurt like hell. For weeks, I felt like I was grieving a death, because, in a way, I was. Not just the loss of my family, but the loss of every false hope I had ever clung to. But I was free, and that was worth everything. It's been a year since I finally chose myself, a year since I cut my parents off financially, a year since I stopped playing the role they had forced on me. And for the first time in my life, I felt free. Not just financially, not just physically, but mentally. I woke up without dreading my phone buzzing with another demand. I opened my banking app without seeing a huge chunk of my paycheck already spoken for. I lived my days without the crushing weight of guilt pressing down on my chest. And honestly, I didn't miss them. I didn't miss the constant need to justify my own existence. That I didn't miss the gaslighting, the guilt tripping, the endless cycle of, "You're so ungrateful." I didn't miss feeling like no matter what I did, it would never be enough. For the first time since I was a kid, I felt like I belonged to myself. And for once, I allowed myself to dream about my own future. Not Damian's, not my parents', mine. I put myself first, a concept that, growing up, had always felt selfish. I poured myself into my work, landed a promotion, and finally took that trip I had always wanted. I started saving for my own home, an actual home, one where I wouldn't be treated like an afterthought. I built a life that was mine, and I had never been happier. It was a Saturday afternoon, a quiet, normal day. I had just finished a workout in my apartment, something I had started doing consistently after the financial weight of my parents was off my shoulders. My phone buzzed. I barely glanced at it before swiping to ignore. Then it rang again, and again. I sighed, grabbing it off the counter. I saw the name. It wasn't my parents. I had them blocked. It was my aunt, one of the only family members who ever treated me like a person. I hesitated. I almost didn't pick up, but something told me to answer. The second I did, I knew. She didn't have to say much. The weight in her voice told me everything. My parents were in trouble. I shouldn't have been surprised. I had known, deep down, that this was coming. They had spent years living beyond their means, assuming I would always be there to clean up their mess. They never thought about consequences. They never planned for the future. They just assumed I would keep paying because, well, hadn't I always? But now, I wasn't there anymore. And they were drowning. The house, on the brink of foreclosure. The credit cards, maxed out. The loans, piling up with interest. I could picture it all perfectly. The stack of unopened bills sitting on the kitchen counter, my mother's nervous pacing, twisting a ring around her finger, cursing under her breath about how ungrateful I was, my father flipping through paperwork, trying to find someone else to blame. They thought I would come back. They thought I would fix this. They thought that no matter what happened, Callum would never let them fail. They were wrong. I didn't need to ask to know what they were saying about me. The victim narrative practically wrote itself. Callum abandoned us. Callum is punishing us. Callum is selfish. Not once would they admit the truth, that they had stolen from me, that they had used me, that they had treated me like an ATM, not a son, because that would mean taking responsibility. And they had never been good at that. She was hesitant at first, like she wasn't sure how to say it. But the gist of it, they were ruined. Apparently, the house was weeks away from foreclosure. They had burned through every dollar they had. The loans they took out, they defaulted. The credit cards declined. And yet, they had still been spending money like nothing was wrong. Trips, restaurants, a new set of golf clubs for my father, expensive gifts for Damian. They had gone into even more debt trying to maintain the illusion of success. And now they had nothing. And that's when she said it. They need help, Callum. I let out a slow breath. And for the first time since cutting them off, I felt nothing. Not anger, not pity, not guilt, nothing. Like I had already mourned them a long time ago. Like this was just the inevitable conclusion of a story I had already walked away from. My aunt hesitated, waiting for me to say something. Maybe she expected me to ask questions. Maybe she thought I would feel guilty. Maybe she hoped I would fix it. But I didn't. I just let out a slow breath. And then I moved on. I wasn't going to call them. I wasn't going to rescue them. I wasn't going to let them manipulate me back into their mess. Because they weren't my problem anymore. They had spent years choosing Damian. Now, they could live with that choice. I had always thought my parents saw Damian as something more than just their golden child. I thought they genuinely loved him. But as it turns out, he was never special. He was just useful. And the second he stopped being useful, they discarded him, just like they did to me. After I cut them off, I knew my parents wouldn't change. I knew they wouldn't suddenly learn to budget or take responsibility for their own mistakes. They weren't capable of that. So instead, they turned to their only remaining option, Damian. Damian, the golden boy. Damian, the successful one. Damian, the son they had spent years praising while tearing me down. They had spent decades building him up, funding his life, and making sure he never had to struggle. Now, it was time for him to pay them back. Or at least, that's what they thought. At first, Damian did what he always did, whatever they wanted. They needed help covering the mortgage. He emptied his savings. They needed money for groceries. He sent them cash. They needed another loan. He applied for one under his name. But it didn't take long before Damian realized something terrifying. He couldn't keep up. Because the thing about my parents? They never stopped taking. The more you give, the more they expect. And soon, Damian found himself completely drained, mentally, emotionally, and financially. So for the first time in his life, he said no. Not because he wanted to. Not because he had some grand moral realization, but because he was broke. And that's when he learned a painful truth. Damian thought they loved him. He thought that all those years of praise, all those years of, "we're so proud of you," meant something. But the second he stopped being useful, they turned on him, just like they did to me. I can only imagine the conversation. How he told them he couldn't send more money. How my mother's face twisted in disappointment. How my father sighed like he had just been personally betrayed. We sacrificed so much for you. And this is how you repay us. You're just like Callum. That last one, that must have stung the most. Because for Damian, I was always the failure. I was the selfish one, the ungrateful one, the bad son. Now, he was in the same position, and my parents had no problem tossing him aside. His reality crumbled. For the first time in his life, Damian was alone. No financial support, no safety net, no parents backing him up. He was just like me now, except the difference was, I had been preparing for this my entire life. I had learned to be independent, I had built something for myself, I had figured out how to survive without them. Damian, he had no idea how to function without their help. And that's when it happened. The moment I had been expecting. It was late. I had just gotten home from work, kicked off my shoes, and was about to settle in when my phone buzzed. I looked down. Damian. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. I picked up. The second I did, I could hear it. Panic. Real panic. Not the usual arrogance. Not the usual superiority. Just fear. Callum, I need help. I leaned back on my couch. What kind of help? Silence. Then, the truth came out. They had cut him off. They had turned on him. They had left him to drown. He was broke, scared, and desperate. And the worst part? He finally understood how it felt to be me. I let him talk. I let him ramble about how unfair it was, about how our parents had lied to him, about how they never actually cared about either of us. And when he finally stopped, out of breath and defeated, I said the words that had been sitting on my tongue for years. Now you get it. Now you understand. Now you know how it feels. No sympathy, no pity, no offer to help. Because this was his lesson to learn, just like I had to learn mine. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilty about it. Not one bit. I always wondered what it would feel like. That moment. The moment they would finally come to me. Desperate. Broken. Begging for help. I thought maybe I'd feel victorious. Maybe I'd feel like I had won. But when it actually happened, I didn't feel anything. It had been months since I last heard from them. After Damian got discarded, I figured I was done with them forever. But they weren't done with me. Because the second they ran out of options, the second they had nowhere left to turn, they came crawling back. It started with a text. Callum, please call me. It's urgent. I ignored it. Then another. We need to talk. Ignored. Then a phone call. Then another. Then another. Until finally, one evening, as I was getting home from work, I stepped out of my car and saw them, standing on my doorstep, waiting for me. For a long moment, none of us spoke. I just stared at them. They looked small, tired, like they were finally carrying the weight of everything they had done. My mother tried to smile. Callum, she started, stepping forward like nothing had happened. Like this was just another normal visit. I didn't move. She hesitated. Then my father spoke. Son, he said quietly, we need your help. There it was. The moment I had been waiting for my entire life. And it wasn't even satisfying. I didn't invite them in. I didn't even let them get past the front steps. I just crossed my arms, leaning against my car. Why? I asked flatly. My mother looked uncomfortable. Things have been difficult, she admitted. I cut her off. What do you need? She hesitated. Then, finally, she admitted it. Money. They needed money. They were drowning in debt. They were on the verge of losing their home. They had maxed out their credit cards. And worst of all, they were scared. But not scared because they had ruined their lives. Scared because they had no one left to bail them out. I let them talk. I let them explain. And then, when they were done, I said 6 words that made my mother's face go pale. You have no right to ask. For the first time in my life, I saw it. I saw the exact moment they realized I was never coming back. The exact moment they understood that they had pushed me too far. My mother started crying. Callum, please, she whispered. We're still your parents. I laughed. Actually laughed. Because that was their last card to play. No, I said, shaking my head. You stopped being my parents a long time ago. Then, I looked my mother right in the eyes. And I asked the question I had been waiting to ask for years. Do you remember the night I called you? She went completely still. The night I needed you? She didn't answer. The night my car broke down and I just needed a ride to work? Silence. The night you looked me in the face and told me I wasn't good enough to even borrow a car? She flinched. My father looked away. And then, for the final blow, where were you when I needed you? I didn't wait for an answer, because I already knew it. They had never been there for me. They had never chosen me. And now, I was choosing myself. My mother was still crying. My father was staring at the ground. For once in their lives, they had nothing to say. Because there was nothing left to say, I stepped past them, walked right up to my door, unlocked it, and before stepping inside, I turned around one last time. I hope you figure something out, I said quietly. Then I shut the door, and I didn't look back. The last time I ever saw them, they left that night. And after that, they never came back. I heard through other relatives that they lost the house, that they had to move into a small apartment, that they never recovered financially. And honestly, I didn't care, because they had made their choices. They had chosen Damian over me. They had chosen their lifestyle over their children. They had chosen to manipulate and use instead of love and support. And when their world collapsed, they had no one left to blame but themselves. So no, I don't regret it. I don't regret walking away. I don't regret choosing myself. Because at the end of the day, they only loved me when they needed me. And that's not love at all. I never thought I'd be writing this from a place of peace. But here I am, on a beach, sun setting, waves rolling in. A real vacation, one I chose, not one I was left behind from. Alicia's laughing at something one of my friends said, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear as she leans closer, eyes bright with warmth. She doesn't know my whole story yet, but somehow, she understands the parts that matter. She's kind, genuine, and for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm stepping into something real, a relationship built on mutual respect, not obligation. For the first time in my life, I feel light, because I finally understand something. Happiness doesn't come from fixing broken relationships. It comes from choosing yourself over people who would never do the same. I used to think family was everything, that no matter how they treated me, I had to keep earning my place in their lives. But that's not how love works. Love doesn't need conditions. Love doesn't make you beg. Love doesn't make you feel like you're never enough. So if you're reading this, if you're still stuck in a toxic cycle, if you're still waiting for someone to finally love you the way you deserve, walk away, not out of hate, not out of anger, but because you deserve better. And the moment you choose yourself, that's when life actually begins. This isn't just a dramatic tale. It's a real story, shared by Callum's on r/True Off My Chest, one of Reddit's most brutally honest communities. A story about family, betrayal, and finally breaking free. A reminder that sometimes, the people we call family aren't really family at all. And sometimes, choosing yourself is the only way forward. Want more stories like this? If you found this story powerful, relatable, or eye-opening, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another deep dive from Reddit True Vault. Because sometimes, the truth is stranger than fiction.